I'm back and forth. Good afternoon, everybody. Once again, this is David Cerns from Haley Marketing, and welcome to today's Lunch with Haley webinar. Today is a fun one for the team. This is our once a year Staffing World Recap webinar, and as you can see from the names on screen, we had a lot of people that went to Staffing World. In fact, this was our biggest year ever for attendees at the conference. It was a great show in Vegas. We had a couple of first-time attendees. We had a lot of veterans who won't admit to how many times that they've been to Staffing World. And ASA changed up the format this year. So they got a few new things, and we did our best to try to keep up with all the changes. So today we've got Brad and Kenzie and Matt and Brad Smith all here, and Lainey here to kind of recap what we were able to take in our 2.5 days of sessions in Las Vegas. So for those of you who have been part of our Staffing World Recap webinar in the past, you know these tend to go long, so I'll forewarn everybody. There's a high probability that getting through all of this in 60 minutes may not happen, but we'll do our best to make sure we cover everything in as much detail as we can. And also just sort of a disclaimer that for those of you who have never been to Staffing World or wonder whether or not you should attend, what we're covering in this webinar is really just a teaser. So we are actually able to attend less than half of all of the content that's available at Staffing World. We just don't have enough people to go to everything. And we're recapping all of these hour-long sessions and consolidating down to a couple of bullets in a couple of minutes. So as you're making your plans for 2020 as to how to educate your team, make sure you put Nashville in October on your calendar so that you can join all of us at Staffing World 2020. All right, with that stated, let's jump in and start to take a look at some of the things that we saw and learned this year. So if you want to, along the way, before I forget, join the conversation. As with all of our webinars, you can tweet to us with the hashtag Lunch with Haley, and we'll do our best to add questions in as we go. You can also, of course, use the GoToWebinar question panel to ask questions, and we'll also drop those in throughout the course of today's show. All right, so the first change that ASA made is that they stopped having traditional keynotes, and instead they reframed them as super sessions where they brought in speakers. This time I think they did more of an emphasis, with the exception of the final keynote, speakers who were really closely related to the staffing industry to share some really outstanding information. And the first super session was Becky Franco, who is the president of Manpower Group North America. And she really talked about the time to innovate in the industry. And what, all of us at Haley Marketing Group, I think, loved her presentation because Becky came from the world of consumer goods marketing. And she really talked about how that consumer mindset needs to become more prevalent in the staffing industry, and particularly in how we attract and engage with talent. And she presented a series of trends that I'll try to do my best to recap. The first one she referred to as the betterness ecosystem. And what that really refers to is a lot of people, and we see it in the younger generations in the workforce, are really recognizing we have one life to live, and it's not only about work. The concept of work-life balance doesn't even apply anymore because we're all connected through our phones, through our watches. We're connected to our office, to our peers, to our clients 24/7. Now, that doesn't mean we want to work 24/7, but that means we really have to think about having a not work-life balance, but a balanced life. When we're at work, we want more engagement with people. We want more meaning in what we're doing. We want more flexibility because life doesn't bend around the workday. One of the things I found very interesting is his last point is that the fastest growing non-wage benefit for people now is remote work. The ability to choose sometimes your hours, but more to choose location is seen as the most important non-cash benefit that an employer can provide. So as we're trying to attract internal talent, I know a lot of staffing companies are struggling to fill job orders. How can you think about remote work as a benefit? The second thing that Becky talked about was digital intimacy. No, this is not some creepy, like one of those movies like Her, where people fall in love with their operating systems. This is about the fact that we're connected, we're always on, and you see it. You go to a restaurant and there's two people having lunch together, both staring at their phones. We are so connected to technology that we actually want to gain more humanity through our technology. So as staffing becomes an industry that's driven by tech, that apps are becoming how people engage with job orders and even sometimes with clients, we have to think about how to retain the human element in our communication. Everything from training to remote work, we have to keep more of that human element in how we help our clients and our candidates to leverage technology. The third point that Becky made, she referred to as clanning, and this is an interesting one. She said you see it in consumer brands a lot, that people want to associate with organizations and individuals they feel are like them. And that, the good, the bad, or the ugly of social media is we tend to be bombarded by people who have the same ideas as we do. Well, that's because it makes us feel good to be surrounded by people who are like-minded. Well, in the working world, our temporary employees, they're also looking for clans. They're looking for organizations they can be a part of where they believe in the cause the staffing company is serving. So if your business is only about, we're a temp company, we fill job orders, that's not a lot of meaning to a worker. If your business is about how you're addressing bigger societal issues, how you're putting people to work, how you're helping improve lives, how you're helping drive the economy, how you're helping maybe with a social cause of organizations in your community or your industry, those kinds of purpose-driven organizations tend to attract more candidates. Those employees want to work for organizations that believe in things and then sustain it with a great company culture. The next point, now. It's the Veruca Salt. I want it now. People don't believe that waiting is acceptable anymore. Thank you, Amazon. If I can't get it in hours and sometimes minutes, I don't want it. And when you think about a candidate who comes in for a job assignment, if it's taking you hours to get back to that candidate or days to get back to that candidate, you're going to be losing talent to somebody else who's developed a faster internal process for dealing with candidates. The faster you can process a candidate, accept or reject the candidate, and get them on the assignment, the more candidates you're going to have working for you. I talked with a client recently who had this exact situation, that they were doing a really good job of getting back to people who were applying in about 24 hours, except for their number one competitor was doing it in 4 hours. And they were consistently getting back to people who said, I already took a job with somebody else. So if you've got job orders going unfilled, look at this now consumer culture and think about how can we change our service process, not to give up screening and vetting our talent, but to be faster so we can make delivery to our candidates better. We can make the work experience itself easy, more personal, and immediate. And the last couple of points that Becky made, she talked about the evolution, which is the growing movement around women's involvement in everything, particularly in business. So how are we as staffing organizations embracing not just women, but all diversity and inclusion? How are we working with our clients to be a place that women and minorities and disadvantaged groups, maybe even disabled people, want to go work? And she talked about how a lot of organizations have an unconscious bias. We don't mean to discriminate. It's just how we've seen the world for a long way, and particularly our clients, it's how they've seen the world. Now we have to go to the opposite end of the spectrum, which is conscious inclusion, really thinking about how do we make the workspace more inviting for people who represent different races, different genders, different economic classes. And as we talked about in our last product demo webinar on ADA websites, how can we even include people with disabilities in our future workforce? And lastly, she talked about the changing face of the consumer and the fact that the people in the workforce are broader and more diverse than ever before. We actually have 5 different generations in the workforce for the first time ever. Overall, our population is aging and our household size is declining. And that is changing why people work, how long people work, the kinds of jobs they want. You're going to see more people who work well into their golden years because they need the income and they're going to want to have hobby careers. As staffing organizations, we should be on the forefront of helping companies to adapt, to encourage cross-generational learning and also to encourage our clients to embrace a cross-generational workforce to get more of their jobs filled. The big point that this presentation was all about is that consumer marketing trends Becky said, are coming to the talent market. I'd argue that they're already here. They've been here for years. As an industry, we have to accept the challenge. Accept the challenge that employees are more in control than ever of their careers. The days of people looking for lifelong employment are gone. Now they want Uber. They want the gig work. They want freelance. They want to be in charge of when they work, where they work, how they get paid. It's leading to, because the economy is so good right now, increasing quit rates. So how do we do more to keep people wanting to work for us, to redeploy talent at levels that are much greater than the industry average? We're living in a time when there's more interruptions than ever, more email, more texting, more marketing messages. So with all these interruptions, we have to think about how we more effectively break through the clutter. And also we deal with the fact that a lot of our younger workers want to have more rapid advancement, more feedback. So how do we provide those kinds of feedback mechanisms to an employee, not just inside our organization, but to a temporary who's working on site at a client's location? As leaders, it's tougher than ever to manage this diverse workforce, but that makes the value of staffing greater than ever. And Becky's last point is think like a consumer, then act like a marketer. And I think we all stood up and cheered when she said that at the conclusion of her presentation. All right, so that was just the first super session. Let's jump on now, Matt, and talk about Johnny Taylor.
Thanks, David. Johnny Taylor was the super session on Wednesday morning and brought a lot of energy to the crowd, which was a really great way to kickstart really the first full day of sessions, you know, if it was the super sessions or those other breakout sessions. And as the president and CEO of SHRM, he started with talking about the trends that we're seeing already and how that's going to impacting the employment market now and then, down the road almost in 10 years. And one of the stats that really jumped out was how, the birth rate from 2009, it's down by 1 million babies. So that birth rate is down. That's going to affect the worker shortage, around 2027, 2028. So if we're having trouble with that amount of qualified workers now, the numbers game is not going to catch up because we know how many people are physically alive in 10 years that are going to be graduating high school with those skills or maybe going to college. So that's where the birth rate is really starting to have an impact on the amount of workers in the industry. And the interesting way that Johnny explained it was, the millennial population aren't having kids, they're having pets. And that's, just how they might have a smaller family size than previous decades or previous generations, but they also are incorporating pets into their family because, that's just their preference and it's having this impact on the workforce. His last point about the trends was how there's a huge perfect storm with the labor shortage right now, right? GDP is up, unemployment has gone down, and that's just a very interesting combination there. I talked about earlier how, the high school graduation rate is going to be lower than the retirement rate. So replacing workers, it's going to be a challenge there on filling those retiring baby boomers and even, the beginning of the Gen X. The last two parts, I think, Johnny talked about one of the biggest fears of talent leaders was the ability to find that talent and how, 92% of business leaders think Americans aren't as skilled as they need to be. But then the flip side of that is recent graduates feel they're prepared, but managers don't feel that way. So that labor shortage is really difficult. His message to the industry was to talk about how, jobs have changed. The industrial era was really about improving efficiency. The information era was talking about more knowledge and skill. But then as we enter into this new augmented era, the three skills he talked about were being creative, being agile, and being adaptable. Because, just think about even the last 5 years, 10 years, how much technology has changed day-to-day life, day-to-day operations, and that's only going to increase and get faster. So those are skills to really look at when trying to, find qualified workers for companies. He challenged the people in the room to really think about how the HR professionals that you are. How does your client make money? What positions are important to them? Really be strategic. Understand their culture, their daily climate. What what matters to that organization that's going to be different from other organizations. So maybe, one of your candidates works well for company A, doesn't work well for company B. With talent being a challenge, are there untapped pools? Is it, an older worker generation, second chance program, disabled workers, anything that can, teach skills to help bring quality employees to those companies? Then, a common theme from even when David was talking about Becky's super session earlier, but throughout everything was, work really fast. Everybody needs it yesterday. And his last message about them was some other advice, right? How do you strategically partner? What's going to work for your companies, not just, tomorrow, next week, but 3 years down the line? Treat your temporary workers not just well when you bring them in, which everybody, a lot of companies really focus on, but maybe when their assignment ends, or maybe if they, get fired or lose their job, maybe they just made a mistake, and what can you do to give them that red carpet treatment? So, you're not forgetting about them when their assignment ends. And then lastly, Johnny talked about, companies recognize there's a shortage and they will pay for that, the quality workers in that next investment.
So Matt, before you go on to your next presentation, I actually had a follow-up conversation with Tom Erb about this presentation. And I said, Tom, it was really funny. Like, I loved hearing Johnny talk about how HR professionals view staffing, and they're telling us, be more strategic and we'll pay for quality. And it's like, I can't think of any of our clients or who've ever said that that's how they're being treated. And what Tom said to me is, he goes, that's because less than 1% of HR professionals belong to SHRM. And so our clients are very often not dealing with people on the leading edge of HR thinking. And that's actually got me thinking about, like, if we're taking SHRM ideas and bringing them to clients who are not part of SHRM, we're helping HR to be more successful while showing them that there really is value, and the HR profession believes in partnering, believes in the strategy of HR, believes in the quality of paying for talent, and maybe we can convince them to increase those pay rates.
Great takeaway there. And the last super session was one I've been looking forward to ever since the agenda came out. It was from John Dornbos, who the name may sound familiar. He used to play in the NFL, but he also is a magician and was a finalist on America's Got Talent. Regular appearance on the Ellen Show. He was just on there last week, bringing home a veteran home to his, one of his pregnant wife. And he started the show with a bunch of magic and told his story about how life is hard, life doesn't care. And John talked about how he picked up magic, really had a great relationship with his mother and father until the day his father murdered his mother when John was, I think it was a teenager. And, that changed his life because he was talking about how his dad was his hero, and then just dropped this bombshell of the story about how everything changed in an instant. So what he does is he really talks about how can you change, things that happen in your lives. And one of his examples was a phone rang during the presentation. And a lot of times during a presentation, people will roll their eyes, be like, why didn't you turn off your phone? He flips that story and says, that's just his mom checking in on him to make sure he's okay. And he had a lot of great examples about this on how to really change some negatives, turn them into positives. He met his father for the first time 2 weeks before his daughter was recently born, because he needed to bring forgiveness and closure to his life. He didn't forgive his father for the act, but he forgave him for just being a lost mind and a lost soul. So what can you do to let go of your ego and really try to do the right thing? And then the last part was just about, surround yourselves with people who make a difference. That's what his magic show, what he did on America's Got Talent, really did. It was try to inspire some people to find something that helps them find good in the world through, his situation is about as difficult as it can get. And, what happens in bad times? How do you overcome those really challenging times and change difficult situations into positives for you? That wraps up our super sessions here. So now we're going to go to the sessions from Staffing World 2019. And I think Mackenzie is first up.
Thanks, Matt. So my first session that I attended was the growth strategies for staffing companies up to 50 million. And this was a really amazing session to be a part of. There were 4 sessions over a 4-hour period, which sounds a little daunting for first thing in the morning to sit through 4 hours, but the content was so good. The speakers were amazing, and the networking and the things that I walked away with were so well worth it. And honestly, once everything got started, those 4 hours went by in a flash. So there were a ton of things that I'm going to implement and a ton of takeaways that I got out of it. The biggest point that I think I can share with everyone was something that Scott Wintrip said. He said that we should all be looking at our best practices and then really question them and question our status quo and the status quo of others and our competitors, and really consider what we're doing right now. Does this work in our circumstance? Is this right for us? And then once you ask yourself those questions, really conduct a regular practices review and think through things like, what are we doing to really accomplish our goals? What resources are we using? Why do we do it that way? And who might be doing it better? And why are they doing it better? And how? And really taking those notions into, the way we do marketing, the way you do staffing, using those things to bring yourself up into 2020 and really excelling more in the next decade.
All right, and so now we're going to go into some of the regular breakout sessions, and I get to go first with, of course, there was a session on marketing, and I think all of us wanted to be in the room for any session on marketing, but I got to watch a very interesting presentation about why you can't live without marketing in your commercial staffing company. It was very interesting because the panelists who were presenting were both from rather sizable staffing organizations and talking about their change management and their rebranding efforts. And one company had actually spent, and I was kind of floored by this, $2 million on a rebranding effort. And the question brought to this individual was, why would you make that investment? And she said that her organization had gone through very significant growth and had actually made a huge acquisition that more than doubled their size in revenue and number of offices. And she said they ran into a challenge. And while most of the people listening, they are not going to go spend $2 million on marketing, I think a lot of the lessons were equally valuable. Number one, they needed to get all the employees to really understand what the company is about, the mission, the vision, the values. They needed to make sure top to bottom, everybody knew what direction the business was heading in and why they existed. Number two, they needed to then take that internal messaging and translate it into a stronger messaging for their new markets where they weren't going to be known under their new brand and new markets they were breaking into that they had never been in before. They needed a messaging and a marketing plan to pursue larger clients because they wanted to go after some big national accounts, and without a consolidated service process, a consolidated brand, consolidated messaging, they would look differently in every city they were doing delivery in, and that would not translate well to a great service experience for their clients. They also wanted to use marketing to help make their internal people more productive, whether it's through recruiting and recruitment marketing to improve the efficiency of talent attraction, to improve retention of candidates, to improve redeployment, or on the business development side to put systems in place to both help with inbound leads and to make salespeople more productive so that the traditional cold calling becomes a much more efficient and effective process. And they specifically on the recruiting looked at systems to help re-engage candidates who didn't complete the applications. I'm sure everybody here has, if you look at your Google Analytics, would see that you have a lot more people visiting your website than complete a job application. And so this company said, we want to capture those people and do everything possible to bring them back to finish the application. The lessons they learned from this change management and rebranding experience is it was harder to get buy-in at the level in the field, not the temporaries, but harder to get buy-in from their own people than they expected. Getting every recruiter and every salesperson to understand the messaging was much tougher, and they really need to think more deeply in future activities about how to manage the rollout. They need to figure out ways to simplify the messaging. When you had too many bullet points about what we're all about, nobody remembers anything. How do you get it down to like a billboard? We usually say 7 to 10 words is all people can remember. So how do you get the billboards of our value, our mission, down so people can actually understand them and put them into practice? One of the things they said, when opening a new branch location, you should start with digital marketing at least a month prior to launch to really start to build some awareness in the marketplace before your salespeople and your recruiters hit the streets. And then also to integrate digital marketing with community involvement and physical marketing to maximize response. It's not just about what can we do on social media or search engines. That's an important part of our marketing, but it's how does our marketing tie into what our salespeople and recruiters are doing to build the visibility of our organization with our clients and candidates day in and day out. All right, and next up is Brad.
David, thanks so much. The session that I sat in, one of them was from Mike Whitmer, the global CIO of Recruit Global Staffing, the parent company of Indeed. And it was really interesting to see all of the things that they're using robotic process automation for. And a lot of people coming into that, I think we're looking for a silver bullet, and we're looking for ways to automate everything possible. And it's really not what it's about. It's about looking at the more day-to-day administrative tasks and looking at things that you can offload. And he recommended looking for extremely specific problems to solve. So not huge, large, big picture issues, but those little things that are taking up hours of people's days. And one specific that he mentioned was rekeying data between systems. And there are some just great automation tools out there to completely eliminate this. It can improve quality, it can reduce human error, and really look for work that doesn't necessarily require humans. And then he transitioned into looking at some very specific platforms that can help you do this. One which we went through and did a demo of was Automation Anywhere. And this is a really, really interesting technology that actually will watch you do tasks manually. The software and technology will learn your processes and will look for repeatable things and actually create the automation for you. Really, really interesting. And then they also have a full marketplace of pre-built bots that other people have already programmed for very specific tasks. So if you're looking to automate and use robotics to help improve your processes, chances are there's another company that did something the same already or something very close that you can leverage and buy a pre-built bot for. Another one that's actually built right into Microsoft's 365 suite is Microsoft Flow. And the example that he used here that's, I think, very applicable to staffing companies is something as simple as saving email attachments from Outlook or your email inbox to a folder on OneDrive. So if you're constantly dealing with getting in applications, saving resumes down, this can automate it for you, and it's a one-click automation. And then some very specific examples. Fire is a tool that integrates VMS and your ATS to, again, eliminate a lot of that rekeying and a lot of those errors that come along with that. Alio and Maya, candidate screening and scheduling bots to really streamline a lot of that monotony and provide a better candidate experience. And then several other platforms he listed: UiPath, Blue Prism, Pega Robotics, IQBot. Again, all of these are automation platforms that can help you implement a lot of these things right out of the gate and have marketplaces with these bots that are already created. And with that said, I'm going to pass it over to Matt.
Thanks, Brad. This session I went to was really interesting to me because, as I'm focusing on recruitment marketing here at Haley Marketing and for help staffing agencies, diversity and inclusion is a big topic. And the session was Permission Granted to Build an Inclusive Culture, led by Risha Grant. And she opened the talk. I said it'd be a really difficult session for people because we're going to talk about real situations. And I'm not going to get into that here. That's probably a different webinar for a different day. But I wanted to bring some takeaways where, she really talked about how Risha's focus wasn't on companies have diversity problems, they have people problems, and really wanted to talk about how that unconscious or implicit bias that's been instilled in you, from when you were a child, and how that changes how, you hire or just interact with people. And, Risha explained one about her, when her grandma, and just talked about how when she was a kid, her grandma's just beliefs kind of came into her, and that's affecting her life right now. So Risha's recommendations were, what's your BS? What's your bias synapse? And shared 3 different ways on how to, you assess it, you attribute it, and you identify it. So assess it, what are the different types of people that make you uncomfortable and why? That's the first part, which can be very challenging. And you can just do it personally, internally, privately, to assess it and recognize that. And then take the step back and try to figure out why that happened. What can you attribute it to? Is it something you grew up with? Was it a personal experience? Is it just hearsay? And then that's where you really identify, was that instilled in me as a child? Is it a society norm? What really has that deeply rooted in you? And to confront that BS, to confront that bias synapse, and not to focus on the golden rule, but to focus on the platinum rule. Treat other people how they would want to be treated. And at the end, the challenge from Risa was how can you personally improve? You have to be intentional about this. You have to really focus on personal development in trying to be build more of that inclusive culture. You have to unpack your boxes, right? What did you store? What have you put away that you don't want to touch? Unpack that. Really question your assumptions. Challenge your microaggressions. When you get triggered or somebody else gets triggered, how do you respond there? And to really build authentic relationships. And it's a very long and can be difficult and challenging process, but it was a really great session that I thought Risha did an awesome job on talking about diversity and inclusion. And now we're going to pass the microphone over to Elaine, who's going to talk about 4 principles to engage and influence job candidates.
Thanks, Matt. So with the session, one of the many sessions that I attended at Staffing World was 4 principles to engage and influence candidates. So this was by Mark Wolf, and he was a really great speaker. He was very engaging and definitely got everyone in the room to participate. But what he started out with was a graph, and it described how employees are engaged with their jobs. He explained that, yes, well, 34% are engaged, and there are 13% that are actively disengaged or looking for a new job. But what he focused on was the sweet spot, that 53% that are disengaged. They're not happy, but they're not dissatisfied. These are those passive candidates. The 4 principles that he described were create an experience, build an image, develop strong emotional ties, and gain commitments. So if you go to the next slide, we're going to talk about creating an experience. He started with something that I thought was really interesting to hear, but I found out that I heard it quite a few times over the course of Staffing World, but it was that we don't have a candidate problem, we have a client problem. So a good analogy that he used was comparing the staffing industry to the real estate. If you show a home and you don't create an experience or an image of what whoever you're showing the homes life is going to be like, you're probably not going to sell the house. If your Zillow description isn't enticing enough, you're probably not going to get anyone into the front door. So to start with, we want to make our job descriptions as desirable as possible so that we can engage with candidates. We want to think about their motivators. What do candidates actually want out of a job? And what will make candidates change jobs? So then next, he talked about building an image. And this is something that I can relate with. We tend to live life in the rush lane. We become so short-fused that sometimes we tend not to focus on the relationship aspect. He did an activity where actually we all got to rename our own roles. So as a recruiter, think about it. What else are you? There's many answers out in the audience, but a few that I liked were career consultant, or cheerleader, or opportunity educator. It's important to remember that it's important to remember that you're all of these things to the people that you work with. You want to focus on why you're sending candidates opportunities. So if you have someone who likes to stay at home with their kids during the day, you might want to say, hey, I saw this 3rd shift opportunity because you mentioned you liked being at home. Why don't you review the job and get back to me? So if we go to the next slide, he talked about developing strong emotional ties. And he started this with a quote: technology has created a lack of connectedness between people. He explained that 53% of people lack meaningful in-person relationships. People constantly feel alone or left out. This one relates closely back to the building an image, but I think it emphasizes the importance of relationship building. We want to make connections, not just contacts. We need to be present in our conversations that we're having with candidates. We need to ask about their pain points. We need to provide genuine feedback. And we need to become in-depth investigators to find the best opportunities for them. And then lastly, we want to gain commitments. And this one, he spoke about the difference between agreements versus commitments. And he said that it's easy to have an agreement with someone, but commitments are what save deals. You can sign the dotted line, but we can do so much more through a committed partnership. And lastly, he ended with a quote: to handle yourself, use your head, but to handle others, use your heart. So I'm going to roll into the next slide, which was actually another session that I attended, which was the most entertaining employment law game show ever. So this was a fun one, and it was put on by the General Counsel at American Staffing Association, and it was a Jeopardy style game. They've actually done this in the years past, so I believe it was backed by popular demand. But some of the hot topics were legalization of marijuana in the workplace, but also how it impacts the workplace. Something interesting to think about is, unlike alcohol, where we can test our blood alcohol level, you can test for marijuana in your system, but not exactly how much. A few other topics were sexual harassment, ban the box, discrimination, joint employment with companies, overtime pay, background, and I-9 regulations. We even got a great musical round at the end with a music video put on by the presenters. But this was a great and super informative session that really went in depth with any audience questions. If you're an ASA member, they have a few of the recordings from their past online, and I assume they'll have this one up in the next couple months. So it's definitely fun and informative, so I would recommend checking it out. So next, I'll hand it over to Brad Smith.
Thanks so much, Elaine. I had as David mentioned earlier, anytime that there's a marketing session or a social media session, we're kind of fighting over who gets to go and listen in on what other people are telling the industry. And it was nice to see that Kristen from Imparture, a social media training company, has shared a lot of the same information we've been preaching to the industry now for a few years. And at a very high level, before we approach social media or digital marketing, we need to develop personas. So we need to think about the person that we're marketing to or the person that we're trying to attract and get an application from. What's their title, the seniority, job duties? What are their interests? What's their background? What's their experience? What are they looking for in a position, or what are they looking for in talent? We want to look at industry specializations. And if we're looking to recruit in areas of high unemployment, are there other industries that we can look to recruit from? Are there crossover skills that we can leverage? And these are all great ways to begin to build a persona of the type of person that we want to get in front of. Once you have that persona, we also want to dig deeper into what their frustrations are. And you've probably heard David, myself, Brad Biley, and others here talk about marketing towards emotion, thinking about what headaches your target client or your target candidate is facing. What's keeping them up at night? If we can understand what their biggest problems are and we can provide a good solution, then marketing and sales becomes very easy. We need to key in on those emotional appeals. Next, Kristen mentioned, and I love to hear this, the idea of SMART goals. Are you setting very specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound goals? Okay, we can't go into social media, digital marketing, or marketing in general just saying, I want to increase awareness. We need to define SMART goals. And then once we've defined those SMART goals, we need to track things. We need to make sure that we use platforms like Google Analytics, that we're looking at the social platform insights and learning from those. We're embedding tracking pixels from Facebook and other platforms into our website so that we can really track and learn what's happening with the people that we are getting to our website and help us make better decisions moving forward. And now I'm going to pass it over to Matt.
Thanks, Brad. The session I'm going to jump into now was led by Eric Gregg, the CEO and founder of Clearly Rated. And Eric's sessions always have a lot of data because he focuses, he's able to collect a lot of data from the industry. And I feel like for the 5 years I've been going to staffing conferences, Millennials has been the topic from the sessions to the post-session talk to pretty much everywhere in a staffing conference. So to hear him talk about the generational shift, how to succeed with the millennial workforce wasn't a surprise, but the data he brought I thought was very helpful. And one of the interesting ways that Eric framed the millennial decision making is, they're not just using one data point. Millennials like to use a lot of data points. They talk to friends, they talk to family. They may even just go online and use the reviews from 100 people as opposed to just one person they know. Yes, there's the flip side of trusting people you've never met in your life, but you're using a lot more data points than one. And with Millennials and Generation Z making up 45% of the workforce now and 64% of it in the next 10 years, being able to succeed with the millennial workforce is very important. And on the bottom part of this slide, Eric collected data on what attracts millennials and baby boomers to a job besides compensation. That was obviously number one. Culture was number two, but the breakdown then was career growth was third for millennials. And at the bottom part of that, it was also very important on what keeps millennials in the job versus baby boomers, or why they leave a job, right? His data showed baby boomers leave a job because of a lack of career growth 33% of the time. Generation X, 44% of the time, but millennials, 76% of the time. And that was what his big takeaway was on what brings millennials to a job, and then also what keeps them or prevents them from leaving to the job. He also talked about how your internal staff, what can you do to motivate them? And he gave a story actually from their own company, Clearly Rated, about how they had a lot of individual goals at that company and they were failing. Nobody was really focused on working on those individual goals, but then when they shaped it around a team goal, maybe a 3-person team, a 5-person, 7-person team, everybody came together and they were much more loyal, they communicated better, and they worked on just striving towards the purpose and vision of the company. And focusing on team goals really help them overcome some of that internal staff challenges. So reshaping that goal to a team over individual mindset helped them a lot. Then lastly, I talked about, the 3 different ways. What do millennials want? They want growth. So how can we coach to keep them? They want communication. So how can you be proactive to increase that rehire rate, right? When their assignment's done, do they know when it's over? Do they know what's the next step? Or are you just going to hope that the actual temporary employee reaches back to you? And then career progression and status, obviously, what can they do to earn status? What can they do to take that next step? Next up is Mackenzie talking about 2 lies and a truth.
Thanks, Matt. So this was an incredibly fun and engaging presentation. There was a live band, there was laughing, there was dancing, and there was a ton of lying to our faces. So we had 3 staffing industry big names tell us 2 lies and 1 truth about wacky, nearly unbelievable staffing situations. There was everything from horribly failed drug tests to some men in a warehouse losing some of their most valuable tools in terrible accidents, which I think had every man in the room cringing. But the audience and the judges had to try and sniff out the real stories, and it really led to some great conversations about these 3 topics that everything tied back to. So they all either had to do with safety, with age discrimination, or just with general recruiting best practices. So there was a ton of great information to walk away with, and I really, really hope that they do this presentation again next year, because this was definitely a highlight for me in Staffing World. And I will pass it back to Brad Smith now.
Thanks so much, Mackenzie. And I'm going to be a little biased here. I think this next session was absolutely tremendous. David and I actually had the chance to lead a session which was called the Smart Marketing Show. And what we did is try to have a little bit of fun with this presentation and do something a little bit different and presented it in a talk show format. So to start things off, David and I came out and did a little intro, did a little dialogue. And I talked about the importance of building a recruiting and branding plan for the passive job seeker. I think when we look at the historic low unemployment rates, we're all focused around getting our jobs in front of more people. Well, a lot of people aren't actively out there searching for jobs. However, the majority of people, if presented a good job opportunity, would be open to considering it. So we need to proactively build a plan to get in front of these passive job seekers. And we talked about using social. We talked about using content. We talked about building those emotional appeals and thinking through the personas that we've built of the candidates we're trying to reach and what would get them to consider a new position. Maybe it's a shorter commute time. Maybe it's dealing with a better boss, or maybe it's dealing with coworkers that are more aligned with themselves. Maybe it's looking at social causes and what companies are aligned with social causes that I'm aligned with. So thinking that through. And then David took the other side of things and talked about when there's a candidate shortage, what we really need to do is sell more. We can look at account-based marketing plans to get in front of key companies in the local market, employers of choice, so that we can make sure that we're aligned with great companies in the local market and we can attract more people. And the premise here of selling more, and you might be thinking to yourself, why would I sell more when I can't fill my open job opportunities now, is that we need to make sure that we have a great job, not just a job, a great job for every single candidate that walks through our door. If we can do that, then we don't have a candidate shortage any longer. After David and I talked, we transitioned over and we had the chance to bring up 2 of our great clients on stage with us and do a little bit of Q&A. So the first was Stephanie Baker from Wood Personnel. And Stephanie highlighted her process for building a new website. And by thinking through navigation, making it more intuitive, making sure that there's great content and it's easily findable, and making sure that everything was search engine optimized, she saw a 300% increase in page views. Again, when we're looking at a candidate shortage, that is a huge increase that has really helped drive more applications and more revenue to their bottom line. And then Stephanie is a great example of a company that built a passive job seeker advertising and recruiting campaign. And they've leveraged Facebook to do this. So again, they're thinking through those emotional appeals of what would get people to consider a new job opportunity, and they're actively targeting people on Facebook. What they're not doing is targeting people for specific jobs. They're targeting people with the challenges that they're faced with in their job. And if we rewind back to 2007, their Facebook drove about $12,000 in gross margin. Fast forward to today, and it's projected to reach $160,000 in gross margin, again, because we're attracting passive candidates with strong emotional appeals. And then finally, John Reed McDonald, Senior Vice President from Pride Staff, joined us. And John Reed talked about the importance of candidate engagement and really thinking through and looking at candidate engagement tools and a candidate engagement process so that we can build in some automation there so we know that candidates are being engaged and communicated with. And we heard earlier how important that was. But then he stressed the importance of adding a personal touch, and we can't lose that. We can't rely 100% on the technology. And then last but not least, he mentioned structured education. And Pride Staff as a company does a great job of this. They have portals, compensation data. They invest a lot in ebooks and white papers to really position themselves as experts in the market and give both their recruiters and their lead generation professionals the resources and tools they need to differentiate the company in the market and be seen as thought leaders. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Elaine.
Thanks, Brad. So the last session I attended that I actually think was the last session of Staffing World was Deeper Dialogue, Conversations That Inspire. So this was by John Claming, and he is an influential speaker. He is an author, but also a sales consultant. So of course, he spoke about having inspiring conversations to close deals. But also while attending this conversation, I tried to truly think of it from a marketing standpoint. So as a social media marketing advisor, how can I use dialogue and conversations through social media, email marketing, blog writing, whatever it is to make my clients' message, jobs, and mission more inspiring. So the first thing he spoke about was power versus force. He explained that power is found as attractive while force can be repellent. We want to be confident in our recommendations, but we never want to be too assertive. That being said, it all goes back to relationships. He explained that the person to ask the first 3 questions usually takes control of a conversation. He also said that the last 8 words carry a lasting emotion for the conversation for later times. So the best way to inspire is to build a relationship that matters. He explained that there's nothing greater for us to give than our undivided attention. So conversations and people stick with us way beyond the time that they're happening. You want to create dialect that lasts. And as a marketer, that's what I want to do with each strategy and tactic that we deploy. So he explained that you can do this through 6 CO words. We need communication. We need to connect. We need to find something that's in common. We need to contribute. We need to collaborate. And we need to find the ideas and feelings that we want out of our conversations, connotation. So even though it's human instinct to always feel fulfilled when we talk about ourselves, we learn so much more through listening. So think about what your clients, your talents, goals are, and use your language to accomplish them. And now I'll hand it over to Matt Lozar.
Yeah, the last session we're going to talk about was from Tech Park, and I really love what Brad Herman does from Call 'em All or Text 'em All, whatever the company's kind of been rebranding itself for the last couple of years. And he really talks about 6 ways to fill jobs faster, through text messaging. And with 97% of Americans texting at least once a day, and it being the #1 method of communication for Americans under 50, texting can be very important. And even thinking back to David's example from earlier in his presentation, how the one company was reaching out to candidates in 24 hours and someone else was reaching out in 4 hours. Like, I'm sure texting was involved there, and that can make it even faster. And how can it be automated? But with Brad's takeaways, some of the ones I felt were really important was, how can you improve your content? How can you make it personalized to include your company name, the recipient's name? Don't just put content in all capital letters. Don't send content that looks at spam. That might get blocked. Your text messages might go out, but the carriers could see that as spam and block it or send it into a folder that no one's ever going to look at. To really think about that database of phone numbers you have, what's your deliverability? What's getting through? A reassigned number that may have been for your candidate 3 years ago, they may not have that number anymore. Maybe it's a different number for someone else, or just isn't in use anymore. What can you do to flush out that database, essentially to get rid of a comparison of email bounces, text bounces? How can you improve the deliverability of your list? One of his suggestions was also pick up the phone and call. Every 10th time, Now, you sent 9 text messages, maybe give them a call, talk to them, mix it up, see if your results are different. Don't just become, really focused on one process, increase, one method or tactic of delivering your message. Think about how you can call someone to pick up the phone and really connect with them. And then the last one is the future of messaging, which, Brad explained is probably a few years out. All of the carriers, kind of work together with companies to see how can we improve text messaging. But I'm sure what companies would love to see is, what can you do to send out more messages at once? Because there is a regulation on how many messages you can send to your area code per day. What can you do to get more characters? Because 160 characters is not a lot of characters in a text messages to convey a message. What could you do to get logos or, any other multimedia and rich communication services in that messaging to make it more engaging instead of it just being 160 character message? So that wraps up our sessions here, and we'll pass the microphone back over to David as we each share our lessons learned from Staffing World 2019.
Thanks, guys. I don't know about you, but I'm exhausted. There was so much stuff that we had, and as I said at the beginning, that wasn't even half of the content in Staffing World. But as always, when you go to a big industry conference, you learn a ton from the speakers, but I think even more so from just the conversations. And there were a lot of great take-home lessons. So we're going to go through a few take-homes that all of us had from this year's Staffing World Conference. So I'll go first. The one that's not a surprise is that the incredibly strong demand for staffing right now is both a blessing and a curse. It's easy to sell and hard to fill. We're seeing, I don't know how many people may have seen the staffing industry analysts email yesterday, but we're seeing it very common that the talent scarcity, the lack of available candidates is negatively impacting staffing industry revenue and profits. In yesterday's email, a couple of the largest staffing companies actually reported that their sales have dropped year over year because of the unfilled job orders. So, how do you solve this problem? The strategies we heard at Staffing World about finding new talent pools, undertapped markets, improving the candidate experience to make people want to work for you, to have brand preference, and I'll make sure you're redeploying people to being a best place to work so that you can get temporary workers to come to you as opposed to going down the street to your competition. Second take home for me was that now marketing is more important than ever, but the industry is making too many mistakes. Lots of companies are underinvesting. In the panel I went to, they mentioned that the average investment in the staffing industry for marketing is now, it's actually up to 0.46%. All B2B companies, the average is 3.3%. We greatly underspend compared to others, and then we wonder why clients and candidates don't know who we are. Lots of companies are hiring internal marketers, and that's great. I love to see that commitment to making marketing a core function of the business, but then they're hiring people and asking them to do too much. They're asking one individual to be an expert at web development, SEO, social media, blog writing, paid advertising, local community events, developing direct marketing campaigns. We've built a really awesome team here at Haley Marketing, but we have 50 people to try to keep up with all of these different trends. And if you've got an internal marketing person, figure out where that person most needs to focus instead of trying to get one person who can do everything. There's just too much to know. Marketing itself needs to be viewed more strategically. Ensure that your messaging, your story is consistently being told in the right way, that you're living your mission and values. You're creating that sense of purpose that attracts internal employees and attracts temporary workers to want to work with your organization. Make sure you've got marketing to support your sales process so that you're doing things before people call and after people call to open doors, warm leads, nurture relationships so that you are strategically going after the right companies and giving your sales team the greatest probability of success. And don't forget that inbound marketing, both for talent and smaller clients. And how are we creating a great digital presence, but not just digital, a great in the real world presence, so that we're driving people to our websites, and our websites have been subsequently optimized to convert. And one other point that I didn't have on the screen that came out of the session is that what you invest in marketing varies by what your goals are. If you're a startup or you're in high growth mode, you're going to spend a larger percentage of your sales on marketing than if you're established and just trying to sustain where you are. If you're struggling to attract talent, you're going to need to spend more on recruiting. So you want to make sure your budgets are dynamic and you're really looking quarter by quarter, sometimes even month by month, at what adjustments do we need to make our marketing and branding and recruitment marketing efforts match our company goals. All right, Brad, next up.
Thanks so much, David. I had a few key takeaways here. Have a bit of fun. We saw this in our Smart Marketing talk show. Instead of the stuffy old 1 hour presentation, we tried to spice things up a little bit and do something a little different, a little fun, add some interaction and engagement into things. And not listed on here, but as I mentioned, we had 2 great clients on the show with us, and they talked about the value of smart marketing. They talked about how they've used marketing as a way to move their company objectives forward and really drive revenue. And think about ways that you can get your clients to talk more about your services. Let's build case studies. Let's build testimonials. You've all probably heard or seen our Secrets to Staffing Success podcast, and you'll notice that we bring on industry experts and talk about that. Look for ways that we can spread the message and turn our clients and our candidates into advocates for us. Next, stop taking garbage orders. And I heard this a lot from the companies that I talked to, not necessarily in the sessions, but in the individual conversations that I had. And a lot of people were complaining that, yeah, there's a recruiting shortage, but they're trying to fill orders that they know they just can't fill. Stop taking them. Get proactive and educate your clients on effective pay rates. If pay is too low, don't take that order unless you have a conversation with the client and they're willing to change the pay rate or change the requirements, and properly set their expectations. If you have your recruiters focusing on these C and D orders, those A and B orders aren't getting filled and you're just wasting time. Next is add value and increase margins. And I think it kind of goes hand in hand with the above. Demand is high. We're getting more good orders, we're getting more bad orders, but demand is high and our supply is low. Any other industry you look at, when demand is high and supply is low, prices go up. Has the staffing industry done this? Every time I asked someone that I talked to about this, whether they've raised the rate, whether their markups are higher, the answer was always a resounding no. But I'm not suggesting that you just go and raise your rates, but look for ways to add more value and drive your value higher and ultimately your margins higher. And last, invest in candidate engagement. We heard from John Reed during our Smart Marketing talk show how important candidate engagement was and how it's really helping them improve redeployment rates. It's increasing the frequency with which candidates show up for the job interview and driving a lot of ROI for them. So stop losing great talent because the shortage of talent is so severe. We need to maintain and keep the talent that we currently have and redeploy them. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to David, who is going to share Paula's key takeaways.
Yeah, I'm actually doing the whole sales team because thankfully our sales team was too busy to go to many sessions, and I think almost any sessions. They had a great conference, but they asked if I could just kind of share some of what they learned in their conversations while at Staffing World. One of Paula's pieces of feedback was, where I am is where I work. And that's interesting because that's the whole idea of remote. And the technology is driving the capability to work from anywhere. Candidates want to find opportunities that give them that flexibility. And you can find the most qualified people in the most unexpected places if you're thinking everywhere I am, locally in remote markets, are a chance to find talent, deliver service. If the traditional paradigm of I find a worker and I send them to my client's site to do a job is ending. And the staffing industry, we need to figure out how we can better embrace remote to expand our clients' access to talent, to give us more opportunities to play matchmaker, more opportunities to fill new roles, and more opportunities to add value and drive revenue by thinking about where people are is where they're able to go to work. Next up, some of Ryan's feedback. Without empathy, marketing and business fails. Love this takeaway, and this is so true if you think about the fact that we make decisions emotionally. It's not all rational. Even though we're in the business-to-business world, we're dealing with humans we put to work. We're dealing with clients who need to fill orders. And if we're not empathetic with the challenge that our clients face, the pains that our candidates are going through, whether they're senior level executives looking to advance their career or somebody who's living paycheck to paycheck and thinking about how do I put food on the table, we really need to empathize with what's important in their life, because our messaging, our service process really should be built as much around, maybe even more so around the emotional side, being empathetic with clients and candidates, the emotional side of what people are going through as the business value of what we're delivering. And the next point, well taken, we've heard this for a couple of staffing worlds now, disruption in the industry is increasing. There was more growth in the gig economy. We saw more companies providing app solutions. So the question for everybody today is, are you going to be a travel agent or a real estate agent? As technology evolved in those industries, most of you know, travel agents, by and large, lost a ton of revenue. They lost a lot of value, and many travel agents went away and didn't come back. Whereas real estate embraced the technology, made it core to how they deliver service, but found ways that the personal service, especially the realtor to the consumer, the brand of the individual agent, became more important than ever. And that is also becoming true in recruiting. The brand of the recruiter, I know Brad Biley talks about this all the time, is building a personal brand. The brand of the recruiter may make or break your staffing company's brand. And historically, we've been, as owners, concerned that if our brand's and loyalty is only to our recruiter, what happens when they leave? Well, if we don't have recruiters that our candidates are loyal to, what happens if those recruiters stay? You're going to lose talent. You're not going to fill job orders. So we need to think like the real estate agents and how to add that level of personal service, embrace the disruption to provide new models for our clients. And lastly, from the sales team is from Brian. Candidates are changing the landscape of hiring. This goes back to the consumeration, to the very first presentation that I talked about. And if we think that what job seekers are doing, we need to change how we position, Brian's got it here as the job offer, but I even say the job description. We need to show people how we're going to give them access to work. What's the story the job tells about how it impacts their lives, how it helps them grow, helps them solve problems? How do we show them the organization in a way that they look at it and say, I want to be part of that? We need to go back to that message of thinking like a consumer, but acting like a marketer, thinking as individuals and how they engage with brands, not just jobs, but how they engage with brands. And again, it's the emotional and the rational side, and then acting like a marketer to come up with the right messages, to simplify the message and get it in front of the right talent and the right clients. Brian's second takeaway was about creativity in hiring. Interesting stat that up to 30% of the total workforce, not the unemployment rate, but the total workforce isn't active in the job market. And that was one of the stats that he heard while at Staffing World. And so how do we provide an environment that welcomes these people back into the marketplace, whether they're people who are underemployed or unemployed because they feel that they're being excluded, maybe because of where they live, maybe because of their economic situation, maybe because of disabilities. What can we do to really embrace inclusion in our staffing companies, and more importantly, getting our clients to embrace it so that we can get them more people and fill more open job orders? All right, Matt, you are up next.
We were so excited about this takeaway that I have it backwards. So we want to think like a consumer, act like a marketer, and it's a trend that, we've heard for a long time. I remember hearing about a conference in April this year back in Chicago, and Amazon changed the game. It's what's that candidate experience? It's a one-click, two-click shop in the consumer world. How long is that application? Is it mobile friendly? Does it require a resume? Think about what your job candidates are experiencing your application when they're finding your jobs. How can you capture that information quickly? How can you share the right content from your team, from your company at the right time? Is it on social media at the right times for when they're fed up with their job? Is it the right time to send out a top candidate's email? Is it the right time to post a blog on your site to get to capture their information with a fly-in on that page? What can you do to really capitalize on those consumer trends into the marketing of your staffing agency? And then building off, something else we heard a lot of staffing role, and even what Brad Smith said earlier was how to find the qualified candidate. People are getting candidates, they're not getting qualified candidates. And one of the reasons very well could be job orders aren't good. And a takeaway that I forget the percentage early in this presentation was people will look for jobs, but they want to look for good jobs and jobs that are either, something that improves their day-to-day life, if it's compensation or commute or whatever benefits. So candidates are out there, but how can you find those qualified candidates? How can you build that long-term relationship with your database, whether it's an email list, with a social media list, with the website visitors in your remarketing list? How can you develop those long-term relationships with potential candidates so that you are able to get qualified candidates for your open positions? Now we're going to shift it over to the producer of Lunch with Haley today, Brad Biley, for his takeaway.
Thanks, Matt. My biggest takeaway from Staffing World 2019 is that we should really be investing the majority of our marketing dollars into targeting that passive candidate. Amid record low unemployment, we should be investing our time and our energy in speaking to the 53% of people, as Mark Wolf said, that are so-so in their careers. Instead of thinking about people that are happily employed and trying to convince them to come and work for another company, or looking at the statistically low unemployed individuals or the people that are really dissatisfied with their job, let's think about that middle ground. Let's think about the 53% of people that are up for the conversation. We want to have that conversation with them, and we want to ultimately get them to jump ship, work for you, and put them into a great opportunity. Mackenzie, how about your biggest takeaways?
Thanks, Brad. I learned a ton at Staffing World, and this being my first year, it was really exciting for me to attend and to put a lot of, names and faces together and meet a lot of people that I've worked with over the past 6 years. I think my biggest personal takeaway came sort of from the legal side of what I'd learned. There's so much new legislation, and there's so much that staffing agencies right now have to go through to not only make a placement, but to avoid these new fines, these bans, these illegal questions. There's just a ton of hoops to jump through. So knowing these things personally will help me make better content to help people in our industry and ultimately help the clients and candidates that they're working with. So with that, Lainey, you have the last one, I believe.
Thanks, Mackenzie. So my first takeaway, like we've heard multiple times, is think like a consumer. So our behaviors are instinctive, and as we all said, thanks a lot, Amazon, but the way we shop, we search, and we make decisions all impacts the way we search for jobs. So it's important to think about that every step of the way. When you post a job, when you write the job description, when you're sourcing talent, when you're closing the offer, think about how a consumer would. And then my next thing was things aren't going to change fast. So in many sessions, they spoke about the impact of behaviors from 15, 20, 30 years ago. These are all impacting us now. So change is going to take time, but it's important to prepare and evaluate about how what's happening now will impact us then and get ahead of the curve. And lastly, I know I spoke about this a lot, but it's relationship building. As a culture, we're always in the fast lane. We want to get as much done as we can as quickly as possible. But it's important to take a step back and really remember to slow down and nurture those one-on-one connections that you make. And again, like David said earlier, technology is great, but can we accompany smart technology with strong relationships? And I think with that, I'll pass it back to David.
Thanks, Lainey. We have reached the end. I think I want to add one more tip, and this goes specifically to all of the company owners listening today. It was a little bit of a scary investment to bring 9 people to Staffing World. It was a huge distraction to the workflow in the office. But at the same time, the opportunity to bring more people on the team to learn, to be face-to-face with clients, and to spend time with one another, not just having fun, we had a lot of fun, but also to be talking about what people are learning and the impact on business. It's hard to do that when you're in the office, in the thick of things every single day. And Mackenzie, Lainey, Brad, this is your first Staffing Worlds. The rookies did a phenomenal job. Brought in tons of new ideas, brought in lots of fresh insights, and it made for great learning for us, hopefully for everybody on today's webinar, and for everybody. Bring people to Staffing World next fall. We will hope to see you in Nashville, and if there are questions that you have about things that we learned, we're more than happy to answer. You can also, I'm sure, check out lots of other great information on americanstaffing.net. And with that said, the only last reminder is we have one more webinar this month coming up before I think we have a final Lunch with Haley coming up in December as well. But we will be giving a sneak peek of our brand new product, Net Social, where you'll get to take a look at what we're doing to help companies better manage, simplify, automate the curation of content and sharing of content on social media. And that is going to be a week from today, Thursday, November 21st at 2 o'clock. From all of us at Haley Marketing Group, thank you so much for being part of today's Lunch with Haley presentation.